put your mics on mute, please, when you can, because there's a bit of back sounds coming through, and I try to get it as clear as possible for officers and members to understand and listen. So, right. Good morning and welcome to the meeting of Regeneration to Sustainable Development Scrutiny Committee on this beautiful Friday morning, the 16th of April, 2021. Just to make you all aware, this meeting will be recorded this morning, of course. Can I also welcome any members of the public and the press to today's meeting? Can I kindly ask you to observe the meeting only and not speak or participate or write in the chat function? Can I also please remind you all to switch your phones to silent for the duration of the meeting, and as I just said, try and have your mics on silent unless you're speaking. Before I go with the welcome and roll call, in relationship to the sad news of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, please can I ask you at this stage to join me in a 2-minute silence for us all to pay our respects this morning. I will start the clock now. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for joining me for that 2-minute silence. Now, can I refer you to the protocols for the remote meeting, which have been previously circulated? Namely, your microphone should be switched to mute unless you are speaking. Should you wish to ask a question or make a comment, can you please indicate either via the chat function or by raising your electronic hand? I will assume that you have all read the paperwork before us today prior to the meeting. Please only use the chat function to indicate if you wish to speak as an alternative to the electronic hand function or raise a technical issue. When asking a question, can I please have you indicate which page or number you are referring to? And the first item on the agenda today is do a roll call. I am Councillor Stephen, the Chair, and I am here this morning. I will now ask Chloe of the Democratic Service Officer to take the roll call, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've marked you as present. Councillor Rachel Taylor.
Present.
Councillor Dean Causey.
Present, Chloe.
Councillor Chris Jones.
Present, Chloe.
Councillor Hugh James.
Present, Chloe.
We've had apologies from Councillor Sheila Penry. Councillor Sean Percy.
Present.
Councillor Cypher Harman.
Present, Chloe.
Chair, I note that Councillor Nigel Hunt's microphone isn't working, so I'm marking him present as he's indicated in the chat function. Councillor Scott Bamsey. Jamie Evans. Councillor Simon Noyle.
Hi, Chloe, I'm here, thank you.
Cabinet members, Councillor Annette Wingrave.
Present, Chloe.
Note that Councillor Leanne Jones has given her apologies. Councillor Mike Harvey.
Yeah, I'm present, Chloe, thanks.
Nicola Pierce. And Brennan.
Present, Chloe.
Harry Morris. Claire Jones.
Sorry, was that Claire Jones?
Yes, Claire Jones.
Present.
Thank you. Eleanor Wellington.
Yes, present, Chloe.
Lisa Potterton.
Hello, present.
Alison Fisher.
Present.
Phillips. Nicola Thomas.
Yeah, present, Chloe.
Nicola Heedon.
Present, Chloe.
Have I missed anyone? I think that's everyone, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. The next item is the Chair's announcements this morning. We have one item for scrutiny that is on our scrutiny agenda, and we have chosen not to scrutinise items on the Cabinet Board agenda as we are happy with the detail included in the reports. I would like to make members of scrutiny and the public aware that the recommendations included within the reports of item 6 and 7 on the Cabinet Board agenda are being amended to include reference to the integrated impact assessment. However, this does not change our decision as a scrutiny committee not to scrutinise these reports today. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is declaration of interest. Can I ask members to declare any interest they have? Yeah, Mike, you raised your hand, Mike
Yeah, item 5, community safety, violence against women, domestic abuse. The police are mentioned in the report. I work for South Wales Police. Thank you.
Yeah, Chloe, if you can provide, I know we haven't got legal yet, but I think it's appropriate and the right thing. If you can provide Mike with the paperwork. The only thing, I don't think is a prejudicial interest in such, so he can remain for the item and listen to the report, because it's not a decision report, it's only information. So I think Mike would be aware of that anyway, but I still think it needs to be noted that he made that reference to declaration of interest then. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
No worries. If you can take your hand back down, just thank you, Mike. Right. Item 4 on the agenda then is the minutes of the previous meeting. The next item is minuted for approval. What I want to do there, it does mention anybody or any comments, but as you will know, the minutes are only for if there's any what is it? They're not accurate then, sorry. They're only for accuracy at this stage. So I'm only going to ask members if they've spotted anything on the 5th of February 2021 or the 17th of March. If there's anything on them that's inaccurate, please let me know at this stage before I move for recommendations to approve both. So anybody seen anything that's not accurate? Take that they are accurate. So can I ask one of the members of the committee for the 5th of February 2021 to propose them and somebody to second them, please?
I propose, Chair.
We are. Thanks.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. And the same goes for the minutes for the 17th of March 2021. Can I have somebody to propose those minutes as a true record?
I'll propose again, Chair.
Thank you. Seconder, please.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Lovely. Thank you. That will move me on to the item we chose to scrutinise this morning. Violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence during the pandemic. I will now hand over to officers who will obviously take us through it. Eleanor Wellington, Lisa Potterton and Alison Fisher. I leave it in your capable hands in the order that you're going to deliver this report this morning. So over to you, girls. I think Claire, perhaps are you involved in this as well?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this comes within the partnerships and community cohesion section I manage. I thought it would be a really good opportunity for members of the team to come and present to scrutiny. I'm not sure if Alison or Lisa have been to scrutiny before, and I'm really looking forward to giving this presentation this morning. Obviously, Chair, if there's any further information that you would like through the scrutiny, we'd be more than happy to provide that, but we thought that this would be an interesting overview for yourselves this morning. Probably hand over to Eleanor now, because she'll do all the technical wizardry and call the presentation up, and I know that they are going to give the presentation between the three of them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. Eleanor, before I come to you, can I just welcome Lisa and Alison then, and just we don't bite. We're a friendly bunch, so relax, enjoy yourself, and we welcome your presentations this morning. Thank you. Over to you then, Eleanor.
Thank you, Chair. I will just attempt to share the presentation with you. Bear with me a second. Okay, is that visible now?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
There we are, lovely. Thank you for the welcome for Alison and Lisa as well. As Claire said, I think it's important for members of our team to be able to come along and share some of the work that they are doing. And rather than you just listen to me for 15, 16 slides, it can break it up a little bit. So we'll just make a start then. Okay, so as Claire touched upon, we want to give a bit of an overview to everybody this morning in terms of domestic abuse and what we've seen since the start of the pandemic. So since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was concern over an anticipated spike in domestic abuse at a local and national level, which I know many people will have seen in the media. There was, of course, little time for us to prepare or adapt any services for this expected demand. And from the introduction of the UK lockdown in March of last year, our local support services saw a 40% increase in demand. And that was across every risk level, so standard risk cases, medium risk and high. This also included our independent domestic violence advisor service, who specialise in supporting our highest risk victims. So Alison, who's here with us today, she manages that service and she'll be able to give us a little bit more information on that. And I think it's really important to note for everybody this morning that rather than just a spike in demand, what we actually saw was that increase in cases, but it just remained consistent. And we are still working at an increased demand at the moment across all services in terms of domestic abuse. So as most of you will know, we've got a leadership group that oversees all of the work, anything to do with violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence. So we meet quarterly, but we called extraordinary leadership group meetings because of what was happening. We wanted to speak to partners about their immediate concerns, the demands that were coming through, as well as funding and staffing matters, just to see what we could do as a partnership and a collective to try and respond to some of that. All of our services had resilience plans in place, and we had to try and adapt services to home working arrangements, but while still maintaining a presence in local refuges which support those at greatest risk. Of course, added pressures with things like additional deep cleaning services that were required, as well as PPE, appropriate risk assessments to safeguard staff and the residents alike. So what I'll do now is I'll hand over to Alison so she can give us a little bit more detail about the kinds of things that we were sort of seeing coming into services, and then it'll come back to me to go through some of the funding arrangements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to enable me to come along and just give you an overview in respect of domestic violence within our communities in the last 12 months. I mean, we started to see some concerning trends very early on in the first lockdown. We were seeing cases where there was an evident rapid increase in escalation and severity of violence being used. Many of the cases were reaching a high risk on a first reported incident to the police, which indicates obviously quite significant violence being used or quite concerning factors in those cases. I mean, lots of the cases had not been known to South Wales Police, to the Info Service, to our MARAC, our Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference process. So that caused quite great concern because, you know, we tried to sort of assume that maybe the lockdown situation was a factor, but obviously we responded to the increased demand by providing the premium service that we always provide. We did notice quite an increase in numbers of referrals coming from the health sector, particularly A&E departments. It was higher than previous years. We looked into that and we can only assume maybe some of the restrictions around COVID, which allowed only the patient attending appointments or A&E departments, was an option that we could identify some of these high risk cases that maybe we wouldn't have under normal circumstances. As a result of the demand on the service, we did note for our staff, I mean, we're a small team, there's only myself, 2 full-time IDVAs and a part-time business support officer. But it was evident for me that our caseloads being held by our IDVAs were increasing very early on. And I think that was probably as a result of the increased demand on the service, but also elements of our safety planning work were hampered by the closure of our courts. Obviously, we provide support within the criminal justice system. Trials were put off for many months, so we're seeing cases held in the service that maybe would have been moved on beforehand. There were delays in relation to housing. Some of our safety planning will look at relocation purely to assist with that safety planning, and there were lots of delays there. Would result in cases being held up, and also I think our partner agencies who provide the step down second phase support were also seeing increased demands, and waiting lists were developing with those services. So we were holding a bigger caseload than we would normally have expected. So I think on to slide 6, we've got some data.
I can't get it to move.
There we are. I mean, this graph was a graph showing referrals into the service from April 19 to April 21. You can look at it month on month, but what we tend to try and do is look at it over the 12-month period. So I've now got data for April 20 to March 21, which gives us a sort of an overview of the situation in the last 12 months. So the service received a total of 437 high-risk referrals, and that's high risk of harm or homicide. 401 of those referrals were female victims, 36 were male victims. High percentage, I think 408 of those referrals came directly from South Wales Police as a result of incidents being reported to the police. We were quite pleased that we increased our engagement level during the lockdown and home working. Nearly 300 cases engaged with the service, and we were able to address safety planning and risk management with those cases. I think that's a clear indication really of the dedication, hard work and resilience that particularly the full-time IDVAs, 2 of them, were able to manage those caseloads at very difficult times. Quite concerning that 479 children were linked to the cases referred into the service, which is obviously a great concern for us going forward. 17 of those referrals were identified as pregnant females. So moving on then, that'll just give you a flavour of the volume of cases coming in and some good engagement rates at a very difficult time. I think then moving on to the next slide, we just recapping some of what I've spoke about. If you can just bear with me. in late March, we had to obviously make quite difficult decisions about mobilising our team to be able to work from home. We had quite limited time to do this, but it was effective from very early on, and the changes in our working practice and processes worked really well to ensure that we could continue providing the premium service. One big barrier that we did have to sort of overcome was the fact that we lost access to the South Wales Police database, which we would use routinely during some of the safety planning work we do, particularly at the point of crisis. However, South Wales Police were very helpful in providing some alternative options for us to be able to gain access to the information that we would routinely gain from their database. Particularly around the criminal justice system and the responses in relation to criminal offences and outcomes for the cases we were working with. I've touched on the fact that some of our engagement increased from previous years. We carried out no face-to-face appointments. All our contact was virtual or via telephone. Which may have freed up actually the amount of time the IDFAs had to be engaging with our cases. So we're going to look at that really and just analyse and unpick some of that to see if we can improve on these engagement rates. We did initially think that contact and engagement would dip during the pandemic as people were unable to leave their home or maybe have free time to have the conversations we need, but that proved not to be the case, which was quite encouraging. One area that has continued to cause us concern is that we have cases that are routinely referred back into the service, and maybe we don't have the best engagement with some of these complex cases, cases where domestic abuse is present, but also where there are multiple other support needs around mental health, substance misuse and housing. But for some reason, and we're still unclear as to this piece of work that we've just started to look at some of those repeat cases to see what happened during the last 12 months, why we weren't seeing them routinely referred back into the service. And it is of concern, and we've asked for assistance from South Wales Police to assist with looking at some of these cases that we are familiar with coming into the service, and they just haven't come into the service in the last 12 months. So there's some work that we need to do there, alongside some of the work that we were looking at for these cases pre-COVID, which was maybe adapting our approach to try and get better engagement rates and more successful outcomes with them. So that's just a brief overview of what we've experienced in the last 12 months, what we've seen coming through the front door, and really to celebrate the resilience that the team has shown in being able to maintain such a premium service for cases, the top tier cases within our communities that we fear are at serious harm of unsuccessful outcomes that we're really trying to prevent. So I hope that gives you a snapshot, Chair.
Thank you, Alison. Is somebody taking the next part? Eleanor, was you coming back?
Yes, I'm coming back. Sorry, it won't let me on my mic.
No, that's okay. No worries, thank you.
There we are. Hopefully you can see that now and hear me as well. Okay, so just to go through some of the funding arrangements then around this whole agenda. So during 2020-21, Welsh Government awarded us an additional 130,000 funding towards Fowler SV services across the borough. And this was primarily to support us with some of the additional demand and pressures as a result of the pandemic. It's really important to note that this money didn't just come to us as sort of one funding pot. It actually came to us in a number of different funding streams with varying criteria, which ultimately there's a lot of administration involved then in some of that. And it does sometimes hinder us being able to make quite a significant impact. but we have ultimately managed to make really good use of this. So I've listed some examples on the presentation for everybody to see. So we've got a communications and engagement group, which Lisa is actually the chair of, and we were able to use some of this money to further promote local services. We wanted to make sure and reassure people that services and help were still available despite the lockdown. So we did a series of different sort of engagement methods really right across the community, particularly focusing on areas like supermarkets that were still open when a variety of other things were closed and they weren't having the usual sort of footfall. We also used some of the money to train local specialist providers and their staff on working with perpetrators. You'll know from previous presentations that we've given Chair that we do an awful lot of work that's centred around victims, but of course we do need to concentrate more on the root cause of the violence and tackle those that are responsible for what goes on. And we did use a large chunk of this money then to contribute to the employment of 2 additional IDVAs within Alison's team. So we were effectively able to double the capacity there, not only because we were incredibly concerned about being able to sort of maintain a good service to the victims that come through and the safeguarding issues that we were faced with, but also because the team were really up against it, being only 2 members of staff dealing with additional demand, housing allocations were paused, courts were closed. So it's really beneficial then to us that we were able to look after the well-being of staff and give them that additional support within their roles. We also looked at supporting our local refuges and accommodation with the PPE that they needed, cleaning products, and of course any additional facilities to help them better respond to the new needs that were placed on them. We've also been really fortunate to have additional funding from the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office to employ a regional drive IDVA, and this is to support a perpetrator programme being rolled out across the Neath Talbot area, and that's going really well at the moment. And we also had some housing support grant money, which we've been able to purchase additional target hardening equipment from that money. So that would be things like window locks, panic alarms, CCTV, again, all things we can use as part of our safety plans to sort of further support victims. What I'll do now, Chair, is I'll hand over to Lisa, and Lisa will be able to go through some of our Vowdr SV strategy developments. And Lisa's been sort of working on this now for the past 12 months.
Thank you, Eleanor. Lisa? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Eleanor. So in April 2020, the new Neath Talbot Vowdr SV strategy, Healthy Relationships for Stronger Communities, was introduced. And this was a refresh of the first strategy that was introduced back in 2016. But obviously, as a result of the pandemic, an addendum was then added to the strategy, which outlined which areas could be progressed and those which may need to have been postponed temporarily. So we were able there to pull out key areas that we could work on at that time, and then the rest of the work would follow when able. So the leadership group and the subgroups continue to make excellent progress on the key objectives in the strategy, despite having these additional demands and challenges to address. So within the strategy, we have a number of subgroups which have been set up to deliver on the objectives within the strategy. So the communications and engagement subgroup is one that I chair. So it has been mobilised during the pandemic, and throughout the last year we have been able to promote the services which have been available with regards to distributed leaflets across Neath Talbot, banners, various places where there would be a lot of public footfall. As Eleanor mentioned, we've put some around supermarkets and other locations across Neath Talbot. We've also used services like libraries, food banks, hairdressers to also put some flyers out to try and reach communities who are usually harder to reach. So when it comes to the relationship and sexuality education group, obviously lesson delivery has had to have been paused during the pandemic, especially with school closures. Key events like our Crucial Crew event were also on hold, but now that things are starting to open back up, we have now got plans to get these events back up and running again. With regards to our perpetrator work, as Eleanor's already mentioned, there is ongoing work with the Police and Crime Commissioner on rolling out the DRIVE programme across Neath Talbot. We also have got continued discussions ongoing with the expansion of the Swansea Equilibrium programme coming into Neath Talbot as well. With regards to training, so we've been able to continue rolling out Group 2 training across Swansea and Neath Talbot. Group 1 training has stayed on a virtual platform at the moment and is still available while the face-to-face delivery has been paused. Finally then, with the courts and criminal justice, the courts have now reopened and cases are now being heard, and our IDVA staff are hoping to return to court as soon as they can and able to support victims within the court process. Developments are also underway for an increased remote evidence facilities across Wales as well.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so just to the last 2 slides then, I thought it would be useful if we could just touch on some very current work streams and things that we are looking at as a partnership at the moment. And of course, all of this will also tie in with the work that Lisa's just covered in terms of our strategy. So we're looking at safe spaces for women, and I know that probably everybody in the meeting this morning will be aware of the recent murder of Sarah Everard in Clapham, and there was a subsequent public outcry in terms of women's safety in public, everybody's general safety in public as well, and a task and finish group that we've now sort of called together to address a couple of matters. I think it's fair to say that this is obviously something that's going to require sort of national work, whether that's UK-wide or across Wales, but ultimately we've got to recognise we've got a very strong partnership in Neath Talbot, and we do have the opportunity to influence some change at a local level. So this particular group will be looking at designing and implementing a hashtag Safe Space NPT campaign. What we'd like to do is get a recognisable brand and get as many businesses and retailers on board as possible that can sign up to this scheme and advertise themselves in their windows with posters or stickers that we produce, so that if anybody is out and about in our communities and they do feel unsafe for whatever reason, they'll be able to go into these places just for some immediate safety, to allow them to make a phone call or to, to be have some information passed on about perhaps our Live Fear Free helpline or something along those lines. We've also looked at considering safety apps that people can download onto their phones. There is a particular app already in existence called Holly Guard, that when it's on your phone, if you are in danger and you shake your phone, it will notify 3 of your contacts of your location, and they will know that you're in need of some immediate help. We will be considering training hospitality staff and taxi drivers on these matters and safety. We're really fortunate in Neath Talbot that we've got an excellent training and development department, and our contact, Rachel Dixon, is a huge support of all of the work that we do. So she's been involved in this group with us. Of course, we'll, as always, be looking at developing awareness raising, particularly in our education settings, because we know that early intervention and those sort of early education opportunities are really, really important. And as always, we'll be considering additional ways to work with perpetrators and those who are responsible for why people feel unsafe in our communities. So that's a really positive piece of work that we've got ongoing, and hopefully we can influence some change locally. And last but not least then is our children and young people services. So as we've covered in the whole of this presentation, we've been talking about the increase in demands. And of course, primarily there, we are talking about adult victims. Alison touched on the number of children that are involved in cases. And we just wanted to make sure that all of the children that are identified in those homes are supported appropriately. So we called another task and finish group just to have a look at the demands into those services, make sure we could offer reassurance to the leadership group that appropriate referrals were being made and that people weren't being missed. We looked at establishing whether social services have actually delivered more in-house through the pandemic, which we know that they have. Identifying whether some local specialist providers have launched new services during the pandemic that have not been as widely promoted as they would have pre-COVID. And then completing a mapping exercise of all the services and developing an information leaflet on services available and the criteria for wider circulation. So not just with people at the leadership group or people who are involved in these services, but people far wider than that. So that's everything, Chair. I'm just wondering whether there are any questions from anybody, for myself, Alison or Lisa.
Yes, thank you, Eleanor, and thank you all for that excellent presentation. It's such an important part of the work we do. It obviously rolls into our community safety and public protection subcommittee as well. It is really refreshing to see, with such a small crew, the amount of work you actually get through. So I'm grateful for that. There was, during our pre-briefing, a number of members who would just like to make comments more than questions, but that may have changed since having your presentation. But I'll go to the first member who indicated, and that's Councillor Sean Percy, please. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me okay. My connection's been a little iffy. And thanks for the team for the presentation this morning. I know I've got to say, start with a comment, as the Chair said. You know, I've been quite impressed with my experience. You know, dealing with the referrals to the team for one of my residents, and they went, you know, above and beyond what was required. And I want to echo my appreciation for that. I've got to say, you know, until the presentation today, I wasn't quite aware of the full extent of the pressure the team under in the last year, which I think reflects even better on the team for the continued hard work. With regards to the presentation, I've got one specific question on the additional funding that came in 2021. That was spent partly contributing to the extra IDVAs. Is any of that funding continued into this financial year? I'm just thinking of the sustainability of those extra roles in the future. Obviously, when we do get out to the end of this pandemic, the issues arising from it are not going to stop immediately. So I'm just thinking how we fix for the sustainability of those roles. And then just a really brief comment on safe spaces for women. I again like to thank the team for their contribution to that task and finish group. Again, taking on a bit of extra work there, but it's a really important issue. It's causing a lot of concern in the community at the moment. Again, for the cabinet member as well, Leanne, I know she's not here this morning, but for pulling together that task and finish group so quickly and getting the partners around the table, it's been really appreciated so far, and I'm really looking forward to the work that comes out of it. Thank you, Chair.
Chair.
Sorry, my iPad froze a second. Apologies. You thought you were all clapping. I went quiet for a bit. I do apologise. Who's responding to that, Eleanor or one of your colleagues? I do apologise.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm able to respond to that question. Firstly, thank you very much to Sean for his comments there. Really appreciate that. And also I'd like to take the opportunity to thank, I know she's not here today, but Councillor Leanne Jones for her continued support with all of the work that we do as a team, not just with that particular task and finish group, but with the whole agenda. It's always really beneficial for us to have her continued support. In terms of the funding arrangements, some of the funding will continue, but as is often the case, we are going to have to continue to look at other funding opportunities as we go into this financial year to be able to continue supporting those 2 additional members of staff within their roles. They are on contracts at the moment for 18 months, so we do have a window of opportunity really to explore some funding opportunities and look at how we can continue with those posts. As Councillor Percy rightly said, you know, we've got additional demand at the moment, but even when the pandemic and the lockdown comes to an end, whenever that may be, this is not going to be the end of the things that we've seen, and there's going to be changes that people will need to make, and ultimately, you know, there will be an increase again, we anticipate, in further sort of domestic abuse or people needing continued support from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. Do you want to come back, Sean?
No, that's fine, Chair. Thanks for the answers there, Eleanor. That's really reassuring. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next person to indicate was look at my paper here. Dean, you got your hand up. Yeah, I'll come to you first while I'm looking at what it was. Sorry, Dean, over to you, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, team. Thanks, Eleanor. Tremendous presentation, and you know, I just want to echo Sean's points on the chair, and thank you for the marvellous work that you do. It's obviously very serious topic, and of course one that touches all our communities really. My question is on the data. I quite like data, and the chart, and I think it's probably most interesting because there wasn't much of a trend other than to say it was a collection of spikes really. Particularly though, it was interesting. I know it was only a short snapshot, but it seemed like there was a spike sort of April time when the weather changes, and then Christmas time, you know, so sort of it goes up, then it sort of comes down over the summer, then it pops up again around Christmas time. So I just wondered if you had a bigger data sample rather than just April to now, so that you could see those sort of the bigger trends then, and then you know, if there is any sort of reality in that, and if there was sort of ways you could, knowing that was sort of come in, whether there are any ways we could deal with that. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Eleanor.
Yeah. Anybody want to respond to Dean, please? Eleanor, Lisa, or whoever?
Yes, I can, Councillor. Thank you very much, Councillor Causey, for your comments. In terms of your question, we do have obviously a wealth of data that is available. What we think we wanted to show for the presentation was a snapshot really of what it's looked like over the past sort of 12 months or so. But I think what could be useful is if we could overlay onto some of that data, one across a longer term, but also looking at our support providers in our communities to see how their data has actually looked in comparison as well. We do know of old that we do have peaks at the times of when people may access help or when referrals may come into our services. Historically, we have always seen peaks around the times of, say, Six Nations and particular sporting events and that type of thing. And Lisa's been part of our communications work around domestic abuse for many, many years, and will be familiar with all the types of campaigns that we will actually get up and running in readiness for those sorts of spikes in demand. But in relation to the info service in particular, I don't know whether Alison might want to come in and make any sort of comments, particularly around the Christmas spike that we tend to see.
Alison?
Yes, Chair. I think, look at my experience of looking at the data. I mean, that Christmas, post-Christmas January spike, when we've looked and drilled down into that, I think what tends to happen is due to resources that are involved in the processing of these referrals. You know, if you think that an incident is processed then within a domestic abuse unit by specialist officers, I think that spike can be a little bit misleading because it drops in December, and I think that could be because of resources around annual leave within the domestic abuse unit. And then post-Christmas, when everyone's back in work, we see a surge coming through. It isn't necessarily relating to incidents over that Christmas period. It could be that there's a delay in us getting those referrals. You know, I know generally we look at some specific events during the year, the Six Nations, Christmas, you know, warm weather and barbecue weather. But I think for us as a service dealing with high-risk cases, I'm of the mindset that, you know, it's very ingrained in these cases, and that isn't so influenced by those events, if you can see what I mean, because, you know, at high risk, you know, it's something that's there day in, day out, and maybe there's a slight influence by the Six Nations. I think the impact of those events are probably hitting more our lower risk cases than our high risk cases. If that makes sense, I hope.
Thank you, Alison. Lisa, do you want to add anything?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a small point really, that our communications and engagement group are currently looking at data trends because we've just passed the season where we would normally have the Six Nations. We've asked the providers to look at their data over the past couple of years and check whether there are still indeed spikes during those particular times of year. Valentine's Day is another point that we usually run a campaign around. And it's just about raising awareness around those times, as Alison mentioned, the types of people who may be involved in those type of peaks could be the lower less risk end of the spectrum, but it's about raising awareness with those people because they may not even realise that some of the situations they're in could be classed as domestic abuse. So if we are out there promoting helplines and explaining that, you know, there's such a wide range of things which can fall under domestic abuse and sexual violence. So we just want to raise awareness around those events at different times of year as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lisa. Dean, are you okay?
Thanks, Chair. Superb, really good answers and really very interesting. Thanks for all the work you're doing.
Thank you, Dean. And how could I forget earlier? It's Councillor Hugh James. Sorry, Hugh. I lost my bit of paperwork. Over to you, Councillor James. Thank you.
Can you all hear me, Chair?
Yes, loud and
Brilliant.
clear.
Yes, don't worry. As a seasoned councillor, first of all, can I say to you all as a team, it's an excellent report. It makes very good reading, serious reading, I know. And I think you're working very hard. And I don't think the public out there realise that a small team like you are doing so much, really, and working in partnership with various people. And I think you're working well with all the organisations. It shows that. And also with the police. And Mike Harvey, my colleague, is listening in on that one anyway. The question I've got for you really, team, is it's not going to go away. I mean, wards like myself, you know, we've got high deprivation, wards up the valleys, like the chairman's area. The question I've got to you is 40% increase was huge really to handle. Do you see these pressures not going away? Are they going to increase? And I would add then that we as members must support this team and even strengthen it in cases. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Hugh. Who's taking that?
I'm happy again, Councillor, yes, no problem. Again, thank you, Councillor James, very much for your comments. And just to echo really what you've said in terms of the partnership, because we do rely quite heavily on our partners as well. It isn't just us as a team. We've got a huge army of us really that are working on this day in, day out. In terms of the demand, unfortunately, we don't think that it is going to go anywhere. We knew that the spike was likely to come with, as the presentation suggested, very little warning to actually prepare for that. And of course, we just relied on sort of staff's commitment and dedication to what they do to be able to respond in the way that they did. We feel very fortunate we've been able to strengthen the service in the way that we have with those 2 additional members of staff. But of course, longer term, it is always a worry, and we're having to almost be a step ahead in how we try and reach out to people, because we still do need people to be coming forward if they haven't done so already, and that is a challenge in itself. But ultimately, all of the communications work that we do, the training rollout that we've got across all our staff, it will ultimately increase demand even further. But we've just got to keep chipping away and encourage people to come forward and access the help. And as Lisa said, we've got an awful lot of people in our communities that don't actually associate themselves as a victim of domestic abuse. And sometimes it's the talks that we give or the training makes people sit back and think, actually, I do fit within that bracket, and I do need to speak to somebody and get some help. So I think we're always going to see new cases coming forward, our high-risk victims, as Alison said, this is something that's happening day in, day out, and they routinely accessing help and support. So, as things sort of unfold as well with the pandemic coming out of lockdown, that's going to come with added pressures for families as well.
Thank you for that, Eleanor. All right, Hugh?
Yes, and I just got to add, Chair, thank you for that. That's an excellent response. I didn't want to leave out everybody. I mentioned police and everybody else, departments, but I can see my colleague Nicola Thomas is there. I'd like that to be passed on through Mike Harvey, the cabinet member now. Part of this has been street care and regeneration, very much working alongside you with cleansing, whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. The next councillor to ask a question is Councillor Saif Rahman, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, I echo what all my colleagues have said. You're doing a tremendous work, a very dedicated work, and a very important piece of work. I do have a question, so if I could ask that, Chair. You mentioned about 437 high-risk referrals. I think what we need to be mindful of that with all most domestic violence cases or referrals, there are young children involved. And is there any way that you could elaborate what sort of support that this team provides specifically to younger people who are traumatized, and most likely they'll be traumatized for the rest of their life, and how and what sort of mechanism you have in place in terms of supporting younger family members within your project. That's all, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Saith. Eleanor?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Saith, for your comments. In terms of your question, the IDVA service, or Alison's team, they only deal with adults, but we've got an array of children's services that are available that we will obviously refer into. So, for example, if there's a police incident and they complete the relevant paperwork, that's automatically sent to our social services colleagues for them to assess and look at whether the family are already known or whether they need to be discussed at the early intervention panel and then referred into an appropriate service. At the end of the presentation, we touched on a piece of work that we've got ongoing at the moment around children and young people. And Lisa's got the mammoth task of actually mapping what services are available, because there are so many. We've actually had additional services come in during the pandemic, which of course have not been as widely promoted as perhaps they would have been outside of lockdown. So we've got a piece of work there to look at balancing out. We've got some services, for example, that are holding waiting lists to be able to support children. And then we've got new services that aren't as widely known and could easily sort of alleviate some of that pressure on other service areas. So it's a big task again, because the picture changes with domestic abuse in terms of services because of how things are funded. So we could have, let's say, a 3-year project for children and young people with a particular organisation. When that funding comes to an end, the next lot of funding will come around and say it's got to be innovative, it's got to be a new initiative. So we're looking to get something else off the ground then to kind of replicate something that could have already been fit for purpose. And that's just a long-standing challenge that we've had for many, many years around this area of work. But yeah, rest assured, whether it's in-house through our social services colleagues or with our local funded providers, there are an array of services available for children who are impacted, whether that's standard risk, medium risk, high risk. And of course, there are services available for children who may have been impacted, as you say, in other ways directly themselves as individuals. So I think it might be useful, Lisa, perhaps if when our visual is ready of those services, we could certainly share that with the members if there would be any interest there, Chair.
Thank you, Eleanor. Lisa, did you want to add to that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as Eleanor suggested, I am trying to put together some sort of visual graphic at the moment, which is sort of highlighting what services are out there, what the referral pathways are into those support services, and hoping to get that finished within the next few weeks. So as soon as it is finalised and approved by the partners, certainly we can share that with this group. Thank you.
Thank you. Saith, do you want to come back? Are you happy with the response?
I'm happy with the response, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Rachel Taylor, my Vice Chair, please.
Thank you, Chair. What I wanted to ask was, obviously you've seen a massive spike in the people coming to you. I'm wondering if there's any kind of, perhaps a silver lining to this, in that you're seeing people who may have been suffering for a very long time and are only now coming to us. I'm thinking specifically of the point you made about referrals from health settings, whether that's through people attending appointments by themselves or perhaps the IRIS programme that's running in doctors' surgeries. Just kind of trying to, what's the kind of balance between perhaps people coming to us as new victims, perhaps because of the pressures of COVID, or people who have been suffering for a long time but only now coming to us, and which is obviously a great thing.
Thank you, Rachel. Lisa, again, Lisa, back to you again, is that Eleanor? Sorry.
Yes, I'm happy to take that, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Taylor, for your question. Yes, you know, we've seen now a spike of people who have come into, say, health settings as a primary example here, where they're actually going into appointments on their own, maybe for the first time, simply because the restrictions have not allowed you to take anybody into consultation rooms with you. Our health board, obviously, they jointly own the Violence Against Women strategy with us. They do their own sort of communications work as well. They sit on our communications group, and around all sort of health settings, hospitals, they are promoting sort of domestic abuse services. You've touched upon the IRIS programme as well, which is an excellent development in our area, which sees all doctors and medical staff in GP surgeries trained to sort of recognise the signs of domestic abuse and ask the right questions. They've actually then got dedicated staff within those surgeries or a cluster of surgeries to actually then meet with the patient and discuss in a little bit more detail and make those appropriate referrals. So, that's another really positive step. And as you say, trying to look at some sort of silver linings really and try and take some positives out of this. That certainly is one of them, that we are able to get these sort of new referrals coming in. But coming back to what you mentioned about getting the balance and looking at some of the data, when I answered an earlier question and we talked about overlaying that existing chart with what's happened in local services, I think it'd be really useful if we did something similar where we could look at the number of new referrals that became known through the pandemic that perhaps we've not seen before. Again, it would be a really big task, and of course at the moment some of what we would like to do in terms of data has not been perhaps highest on the list in terms of responding, I guess, to the immediate demand, and safeguarding is top priority. But hopefully as sort of things progress and as things change slightly, we'll have more time to really look a little bit deeper really into some of that data, and of course as always we'd be glad to bring that back and share some of that with you.
Rachel, do you want to come back?
No, just to say thank you very much, Eleanor, and thank you so much for all the work you've all been doing, because I know you've been under huge pressures and you've been responding brilliantly. So thank you all.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Any other member got a question for the team? No? Just a little one from me, and obviously I reiterate and concur with all the comments that have been made, and thank you for the answers. You're very professional, as I said earlier, small team doing an amazing job. Obviously, as you will know well, in our community safety and public protection meetings, it's always mentioned, and I just wondered where it fits in. And again, not trying to preempt putting more work on the team, but I just wondered, this item is violence against men. Obviously, mental health within men, as you know, the stats for suicides within young men is quite high. So it could have an overlaying with domestic abuse towards men as well. And I just wondered, while it's not there as the item, but how does it work or fit in with what you were doing? Because you will see it from both angles. It may be a lot less, and of course we all recognise violence against women is paramount, given the stats that you've shared with us. But I just wondered, percentages wise and so forth, about men, what work are the team embarking on then in that aspect of the work that you are doing? And apologies that this isn't asking you to do extra work. I just want a better understanding how you support men as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so with the title of our presentation, Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence, that reflects the Welsh Government Act that was introduced in 2015, where it was felt that it just needed to be recognised that women are disproportionately affected by this issue. So ultimately the work that we do has got to reflect that. But of course, we never look to sort of take away from the fact that actually there are men that suffer from domestic abuse as well. And of course, we've got, as well as we've got services for women, we've got an array of support services for male victims as well. There's a different challenge, I think, in getting male victims to disclose. There's almost a different stigma, I think, sometimes that sits around some of that. So again, that's been a key piece of work for Lisa in the engagement team, looking at, well, actually, how do we promote services and try and engage in a different way. Similarly, we're looking at how we can engage differently with older victims, with younger victims, with disabled victims, our LGBTQ community, because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach here as to how we get people to disclose and ultimately engage with us for sort of better outcomes for themselves and their families. Alison's service do actually support male and female victims, as do many of our other support providers in the area. We promote a male victims helpline, as well as the sort of other helplines that we routinely promote. So there are things going on. It's just that when we look at the data and our approaches, obviously it is quite different. I don't know whether there's anything Alison wants to add in terms of the IDVA service there, Chair.
Yeah, Alison.
Yes, Chair. As I said, I mean, numbers are 36 male referrals who we had into the service during the last 12 months. I don't have the exact stat, but the engagement levels were way above 80% for those few cases that we had of 36. I think for the adverse service, for male victims coming into us as high risk, they're almost thrust into that forum because of a high risk assessment, whether it be as a result of a police incident or not. So we do have some sort of luxury that engagements at that point then are relatively easy for us. I think my worry is not being in the high risk forum is the, you know, the barriers for somebody to approach and disclose without having to wait until they're high risk. I mean, the service for the high risk cases is premium, and we've found that the males have engaged really well with that. There's been quite a lot of success about the virtual contact rather than asking for one-to-one face-to-face, particularly because, you know, our team are all female, and we're aware that that could be a barrier. But engagement in the last 12 months has been really, really good. But my worry is for male victims out there who aren't being thrust into that whole high risk premium service provision, because, you know, accessing services comes with a huge amount of barriers, we all know, and that is a worry for me. But, you know, there is good work out there that's promoting the male helpline, and there's Callan Domestic Violence Service offer a voluntary male victim programme that is well attended, but there's lots more work to be done out there to break down some of these barriers.
Thank you for that, Alison, Eleanor, and Lisa. I have asked any other members, there are no questions. Can I just thank you once more? You'll certainly be having the support, and I'm sure you'll have the support of council or members anyway, but you certainly have the support from this committee in the work you do, and anything that we are able to help with, I'm sure cabinet members and officers will let us know. We will keep an eye on this, obviously, going forward, and bring further reports back as and when necessary. So it's a very important piece of work, and we are grateful, as you've heard from all our members this morning, complimenting you, really. So thank you for that. Okay, I'll move on. Right, I got a bit of an announcement on item 6 now. The pre-decision scrutiny, as officers, members heard at the beginning of the meeting, we were not going to scrutinise any items on the Cabinet Board agenda. So I would have skipped that at this stage. However, due to a member who was unable to make pre-briefing for technical difficulties, and also had sound quality issues when first joining this meeting, he has put forward and asked if he can ask the question on item 6, the metal detecting policy, which you will find the report of this is on pages 5 to 16. I am going to allow him to ask his question. I think it's appropriate while we have the officers here, and it was an agenda item. So I'm going to ask Nigel Hunt, Councillor Nigel Hunt, to now ask his question on this agenda item at this stage. Nigel, over to you, please.
Chair, if I could come in, I think Councillor Hunt was having problems with his microphone, so he's put questions in the chat. So I don't know if officers can refer back to them.
Chloe, have you put this question in the chat?
Yeah, Councillor Hunt has put his questions in the chat. Yeah.
Can you actually read it out?
Yeah.
Rather than the officers go and read it. If you read it out, they'll have an opportunity then to understand what his question is and maybe respond. If you could, please, thank you.
Chair, if I just read out what Councillor Hunt put in the chat previously. So he said, I would like to have asked if any metal detecting groups were consulted before we implemented the policy. Could officers confirm that any finds over 300 years old have to be reported to museums? Why do we differ from Swansea City Council, whom have a policy of cooperation with metal detectorists? They generate income through it. Detectors have been known to find medieval and ancient burial grounds, which they are obligated to report to archaeologists. Metal detecting is known to be good for mental health. I would like it to be minuted that I do not agree to this policy as it is put in front of us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chloe. Simon, is this for you?
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
My microphone wouldn't come off mute.
That's okay.
I'm happy to take questions on it, and my colleague from Street Care, Nicola, is here as well because she's been involved in developing the policy.
Between you then, if you could deal with this Nigel's question, please. Thank you.
Okay, will do. I think there are all sorts of issues why we would struggle with the policy, I guess. I mean, from my point of view, any bit of development work that we do, we generally have to have before we start breaking ground on anything, we'll have the ecologists asking us 100 different questions about things that are going on. We'll have, if it's in an area where there's potential for underground, building remnants of buildings, etc. Well, we have the archaeologists on our case as well, and these things cost significant amounts of money. I mean, I think just disrupting ground where we've got no policy on it, and we haven't checked things first, would be very difficult and very difficult to track. So as a general rule, I think we're looking at not having it at all.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon. Did your colleague Nicola wants to come in on this with the input?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yep, I think my mic's working. Thank you, Chair. Just with the specific questions of consulting with metal detecting groups, they weren't consulted with. We only consulted with other local authorities and interested parties such as NRW and the Canal Trust. And yes, Councillor Hunt is correct that any fines do have to be reported, but they have to be reported to the local coroner within 14 days of the fine. I think that was all his questions.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. Now, as Nigel hasn't got a mic, Chloe, I will give a little bit of leeway if he wants to write a response. What I'm referring to, though, is that if he needs more detail on this, I mean, he could have asked prior to the meeting. He could have asked his question prior to the meeting. I think that we can have this conversation with officers in what he's trying to find out. And obviously, it's his call. If he wants to vote against the recommendation, then he's permitted to do so as well. But I'm trying, it's very difficult now that he hasn't got a mic so he can speak with officers to have an understanding. I'm not going to allow, 20 minutes of conversations through chat. That's going to be very difficult. And sometimes you can construe a chat information in a different way than when you are speaking to officers. So I'm going to allow him one response there if he can type whatever he wants up, and I'll put it back to both Simon and Nicola, and then I will move progress then, if that's okay. Come in then, Chloe. Go on, you put your hand up. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Just to let you know, Councillor Hunt has come back into the chat and said Swansea City Council work with metal detectorists. I would like that conversation. I will speak on Monday, and he will speak outside of this meeting. So that's the response there. I just want to clarify, just for the purpose of the meeting and the public, if Councillor Hunt is still going to, what he said earlier, not being supportive of the recommendation, can I just ask Councillor Hunt to clarify that in the chat, please, so that we can move forward?
Yeah, you preempted me. That's what I was going to say next. So thank you for the information, and I look forward to him, continuing with whatever he needs to do. So yes, Nigel, if you can hear me, obviously you can hear but can't speak. If you can now put in the chat what you are proposing to do. I think you already have. Chloe's got a hand up again. Back to you then, Chloe.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Hunter said he's not supportive of this recommendation. So, Chair, if I can, moving forward with this, if any other member is also not supportive of this, could they just raise their hand function now, and if everyone else is supportive, then we can move to the recommendation, Chair.
Well, thank you, Chloe, but I was just about to move to the recommendation in light of what has been discussed and said, and I would have then said to all members, if they have anything to say first, you know, in respect to the conversation that's been had, then please raise their hand. If not, I will be going straight to the recommendation. And in light of Nigel's own comments, I don't know if he is showing in the chat to put his hand up, but he's already indicated that he's not proposing it anyway. So you can take the records that Nigel is not. But can I ask other members then to, if they are not supportive of the recommendation, to raise their hands at that point. So unless anybody got anything else to say on this item, I go to the recommendation now, which is on page 8, and it's in 2 parts. It is recommended the council does not support metal detecting activities on its land, and part 2, that the draft policy given as Appendix 1 in respect of metal detecting activities be adopted. So that is the recommendation. Can I have somebody to propose a recommendation, please? Any member want to propose a recommendation?
I propose, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. Rachel, second. So can members who are not or wants to abstain raise their hands at this point? I see none. So Chloe, I think it will show that all members present support the recommendation, with Nigel Hunt not supporting the recommendation. Is that correct? Do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. That'll be noted in the minutes that Councillor Nigel Hunt wasn't in support, but the recommendation, as you said, has gone through.
There we are. That's lovely.
Sorry.
No, that's fine, Chloe. Thank you very much. Right, if I move swiftly on, item 7 would be scrutiny forward work programme. I'm going to hand over to Chloe. We all know at this stage that we can add items to a forward work programme, but there was an item that should have been here today, so I'll hand over to our officer for explanation just on that item. Over to you again then, Chloe, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, as you said, the forward work programme is just for noting today, but just to make members aware, because we did have a last minute change, that the active travel plan is now going to be taken on the next meeting, which is in May, the 14th of May. So just to let you know that members will see that report then.
There we are. That's lovely. Thank you for that. And then the final item is item 8, which is urgent items. I do not have any, so it still was quite a relatively quick meeting. I thank you all for your attendance. I thank officers for their presentation. I think it is still an excellent meeting for what we needed in the agenda today. I appreciate your time and everything. As you say, everybody says now safe journey home, but most of you are probably at home. So have a lovely weekend. That's all I'm going to say. And I